Hello, everyone. How are you?
Good.
You're good?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm so happy to see you. I'm going to try to speak a little slower this time, not because of your level of English, which is very high, more because I think sometimes it's difficult to hear in a room like yours. Maybe there's some echo. So if I talk too fast and it's difficult to understand because of that, just remind me, okay? Because I get excited and then I start to talk and talk and talk. So if you feel like I'm going a little bit fast, just kind of give me a signal, okay?
Okay.
So, and I think we're okay to do this in English again, right? Perfect. Okay. So we'll try to be a little bit interactive, but I'm not going to do the quiz with you this time. I'm going to be nice to you today. The other times I made you have a quiz and try to, I tested you immediately, but I'm not going to do that today. Instead, today we're talking about, oh, thank goodness. We're talking about food today. So I am dressed for you. I'm wearing my, I dressed up for you. I'm in a library, but we're going to pretend I'm in the kitchen. So I'm wearing my American cooking school apron. You call this an apron, A-P-R-O-N. So in fact, we started at my association. You can see I'm a library here, but we also have a very nice kitchen. And we started teaching classes in the kitchen several years ago. We had a friend who is from Trieste, which is where I am. He moved to America and he was a chef in America. And then he came back to Trieste to help take care of his mother. And he was so bored with being, just taking care of his mother. He actually came and taught some cooking classes for us. So we made these very beautiful aprons. And then, do you know that the next year, we called it, this is like cooking diplomacy, or we called it diplomacy through food. And then the American embassy took our idea. Can you believe that? Next thing you know, there's Hillary Clinton talking about diplomacy in the kitchen. We thought, wait a minute. She took it from us. But anyway, we can always get something out of talking about food. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But I want to ask you, do you have I don't know if you brought something to write with to take a few notes. Not that I'm not going to ask you to do anything too brainy, but what I like to sometimes do is ask people to write down a couple ideas about what do you think about when you think of American food. So if you've got a notebook and you want to take a minute or so to write down your ideas, what comes to mind when you think of American food? It's probably not always the most positive. Maybe McDonald's comes to mind, maybe obesity comes to mind. So I'm just curious about, if you just write for a moment, if you have a piece of paper. If you don't have a piece of paper, you could always take notes on your phone, or you can just take notes in your mind. Take a moment and think about what comes to your mind when you think about American food or American cuisine, or however you want to call it. I'm going to give you 1 full minute to really just think about what comes to mind. Just write anything down that comes to you. Maybe there's a type of food you've heard of. Maybe there's restaurants you've heard of. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you've been to America. Maybe you've had something that stayed with you. Maybe it's something you've heard of. Just take another 30 seconds to write down anything that comes to your mind. Maybe nothing comes to your mind and your page is blank. I don't know. Okay, so that was a little bit of time. Any ideas? What came to you when you were thinking about American food?
I wrote down junk food,
Junk food, that's a good one. Uh-huh.
unhealthy, expensive, unhealthy,
Unhealthy, okay.
and expensive.
Expensive, interesting. Okay, good, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that list? We have junk food, unhealthy, and expensive.
I wrote meat
Meat, okay.
and the pancakes.
Pancakes. Pancakes. You can't have a list about American food and not talk about pancakes, right? Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add to the list? We have junk food, unhealthy, expensive, meat, and pancakes.
Hot dog.
Hot dogs. Oh, there you go.
Potatoes in different
Doritos.
potatoes
Potatoes. Okay, potatoes. Okay.
and drinks in
Drink.
different colors. I have found only different colored drinks unless water, natural water.
Okay, drinks of many colors and water. Great. Anything else we want to add?
Also, they need a lot of sugar.
Sugar. Okay, anything else?
Hamburger, that is
Hamburgers, of course.
meat.
I also wrote salsa Alfredo.
Salsa Alfredo. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, because that's one of the things that drives Italians crazy. What's the other one? What kind of pizza drives Italians crazy? The pizza with what? The pizza with pineapple, right? Pizza with pineapple always comes up. Anything else?
Caesar salad.
What? Caesar salad. Yeah. Caesar salad
With parmesan.
with Parmesan cheese. Excellent. Anything else?
Macaroni cheese.
Macaroni and cheese. Well done. Macaroni and cheese. Yeah. Okay. Macaroni and cheese. Welcome. We're just talking about what comes to mind when we bring up American food. So our list so far is junk food, unhealthy, expensive, meat, pancakes, hot dogs, potatoes, drinks of many colors, sugar, hamburgers, Alfredo sauce, macaroni and cheese, pizza with pineapple, Caesar salad, and Parmesan. Anything else?
I know that teenagers go a lot to Starbucks.
Starbucks. Oh yeah, Starbucks has this, yeah, Starbucks, which is like the coffee place, right? Okay, Starbucks. Yeah, teenagers are crazy about Starbucks. What else?
Maybe also Dunkin' Donuts.
Dunkin' Donuts, okay, which now they've changed names. It's called something like Dunkin' just now, or something like that. Dunkin' Donuts, okay, so these are fast food places. What else?
Domino's Pizza.
Domino's Pizza, okay. All right. What about other fast food? What about the classic fast food places that you've heard of? We said McDonald's. What are the? Huh?
Sammy, something like this.
Sam?
One with the girl with the two braids, the red hair.
Cindy's? Is Cindy's or Wendy's? There's a Wendy's for sure. Wendy's, okay. Wendy's, okay. These are like the sort of, you probably heard of KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken.
And also
Okay.
Taco Bell.
And what?
Taco Bell.
Taco Bell. Yeah, Taco Bell. Okay. Okay. So you guys have a pretty good culture of American junk food. Anything else? Good. I love it. Okay. So these are the thing, and these are the foods we think of. We think of American foods. We don't have a tendency to think very healthy, right? We tend to think about fast food. We think about hamburgers. We think about meat, right? A lot of meat. Maybe, you know, my husband has a thing where he's like, oh, it's steak. You go there, like everybody eats steak there, right? So red meat seems to be a big deal. Fried chicken, right? Some of these things. So we don't have a very good reputation for being particularly healthy. And there's a good reason for that. In fact, I'm going to share my screen with you once in a while because I did an experiment today, okay? Because speaking about American food, I have my idea about American food. And sometimes I get kind of caught up in the ideas about American food. And then I remember, wait a minute, there's always more than one way of looking at things. So I have a tendency to think, oh yeah, in America we eat unhealthy. But then why is it when I go to America, I can't wait to eat everything I can get my hands on. I miss everything, right? Even though of course I love eating here, I love the food, but when I go home, I just become like a ravenous, Labrador, eat everything I can find. But let me just share my screen with you. Oh, I can't. Why won't they? The host disabled. Let me see if I'm going to send a quick message to our friend Simone, see if he'll let me share my screen. Just a second. I have to write. It's weird. I'm speaking to you in English, but I want to talk to him in Italian. So I'm just asking him if he can just change the settings so that I can share my screen. But in the meantime, I have other things to share with you. So I have the same idea as you, like, well, there's something kind of really attractive about American food, but on the other hand, it's kind of repulsive. So I went to my library, right behind me, not this particular room, but I went to see, well, what if I went to the library in this particular American library, what would I find? And what surprised me was what I found. So this is what I found. Okay. So what I found is a whole bunch of books. So I guess what I want to do is talk to you. I'm just moving myself around here. Is talk to you maybe about some of the things you may know, some of the things you may not know about American food, and just get your ideas about them. And then I also have, oh, thank you, Simone. I also have anybody who attended last time and asked me for the lesson. I said I would send it and then I didn't. So I will send you 2 lessons this time, the one from last time and this one. So I just want to show you first the picture. I took a picture of the lesson, of my library. Remember I told you, what did I find? So my question then was, what is American cuisine, right? Let's take a look at my cookbook. So I want to go back up here. Let me just... I always make these very, very long lessons. But so if I come here, my question to you is, what do you think of when you think of American food, right? That's the first question I asked you. And of course, everything that came to mind was everything we said. It was strange takes on Italian food, but also lots of kind of greasy fast food, things like that. But we probably didn't have this come to mind, like this big pile of books. But then again, how many people go to the library to get information about American food? Probably not very many. I did today. But I just want to tell you what I found today. And it gave me a different perspective on looking at American food. So as you can see from the picture, we've got the I Love New York, recipe book with things probably from, the Northeast, but especially New York City, which of course, New York City, American food, besides the fast food component, is a lot about who emigrated to America. So you can imagine what you find in the I Love New York cookbook. Maybe you've heard of New York cheesecake. We're famous for desserts too. There's a reason we're all fat. It's not by accident, right? But I have the New York one in front of me. So this one is not just New York City, though. It's also all of New York State, okay? And so if I look at what they've got here, it goes all the way from apples, asparagus, autumn squash, to beans, beef, beer, beets, berries, black sea bass, okay, fish, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, celery root, chamomile, cherries, chèvre in French, okay? But then also there are a lot of things that obviously were from Italian cooking, ricotta, or we say ricotta, but in English we say ricotta, right? Lots of salads, lots of things like that. So the New York cookbook has its own set of things. And then I found this thing, which I thought was interesting. The Sioux Chef's Indigenous Cooking, which is, of course, about Native American cooking, which we're going to talk about later in the lesson today. So when I think Native American food, I'm not thinking grease at all. I'm thinking mainly things that you'd find in your garden, okay? Or so tubers, lots of potatoes and other root vegetables, berries, nuts, things like that. So a different perspective there. Then I found there's the barbecue Bible. Maybe this is closer to what you may think of when you think of American food, when you think of Texas, for example, people with these giant grills putting large cuts of meat on there. So meat is an important part of the American diet, that is for sure, especially when you look on a page like this and you see it's all about how to cut meat and what the different cuts are on the grill. So grilling meat is a big deal, okay? Mainly, well, I want to say usually beef, which would be from a cow, but actually it's not just that, it's also fish, it's also everything else, but grilling, very important. Then I found this book called Local Flavors, and this one is just about shopping at the American farmers market. Okay, so the farmers market is when the farmers come out and sell their, you call it that kilometer zero thing, farm to table. But so we kind of forget that there's a whole movement of farmers markets and eating healthy there. Now, again, are these the rule or the exceptions? They're exceptions, but it's important to point out. Then I've got the main summers, okay? Where do you go in the summer? If you're in Trieste, you go to Croatia, you go to the seaside. Where do you go if you're in Bolzano? I don't know where you go in the summer. Maybe you stay where you are. But there are lots of cookbooks about, places like Maine. Maine is famous for lobster, seafood, right? Lobster rolls and all kinds of delicious things. So that's on here. Then I think you're going to love this one, the Italian-American Cookbook, where famously there's the recipe that you were talking about, the Alfredo recipe, which I wanted to read to you a little passage because I found it very interesting. Now, if you've been to America and you've had Fettuccine Alfredo, or you have American friends who came here looking for it and you were horrified by it, this is the story. So, are you interested in knowing the real story?
Yeah, of course.
All right, here we go. So, Fettuccine Alfredo is one of the most misunderstood and most corrupted of all Italian. But of course, when Americans say Italian, they don't mean Italian from Italy. We mean Italian-American, okay? Italian dishes. But it actually originated in Rome. Did you know that? So it originated in Rome in 1914 at a restaurant named Alfredo, owned by, surprisingly, Alfredo di Lelio, whose wife had lost her appetite after the birth of their son. Alfredo restored it with a simple dish of fettuccine, okay, egg pasta, right, with triple rich butter, wow, and the heart of a wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. So in the end, it was really just pasta, butter, and Parmigiano. Okay, that's how it started. Huh?
Pasta in bianco.
Pasta in bianco, basically. Which when you don't want to eat, what tastes better than pasta in bianco? Nothing. It's like the perfect food for when you don't feel like eating, right? So, but what's interesting is Di Lelio featured the dish at his restaurant on the Via della Scrofa, but he was hardly prepared. I mean, he wasn't prepared for the fame. So he got famous off of this. For the fame that came when Hollywood movie stars, see, all you need is to have a Hollywood movie star come to your restaurant and have pasta in bianco, and it can change your life. It was Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, these two actors. They arrived in Rome on their honeymoon in 1927. And when they tried fettuccine Alfredo, they had it every meal they could. They just loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. And at the end of their stay, the story goes that they actually presented him with a gift, and it was a golden spoon and a fork to thank him. I don't know if I believe it, but anyway, that's what they say. And then they say that fork and spoon were also melted down by Mussolini for the war effort. Is it true? I don't know. I can only tell you what I'm reading. Okay. But what happened after that? When did it become what it is now? Well, when the recipe went back to America, which of course at some point it did, what they found is that American butter wasn't The same thing, right? And the Parmesan, have you ever had American Parmesan? It's not Parmigiano, but Parmesan. It's like a powder. It's not from like a real wheel of cheese. It's like a can of something that you shake onto your food. And so, of course, you put that butter and, American butter, whatever it was at the time, plus this sort of powdered cheese. It didn't come out the same, did it? So what did they start to do? They started adding heavy cream, which is a panna, right? So what you would probably call it is fettuccine alla panna or alla crema, but in America, anything that became that sort of heavy cream sauce with maybe a little bit of cheese in there became an Alfredo sauce. So I thought that was interesting. So of course, there's still the original recipe you can still get in certain places, like at Epcot Center, strangely, in Florida, but also, of course, I think Alfredo opened a restaurant where there's an Epcot in Walt Disney World in Florida, where the dish is still made correctly with only butter and cheese. In Italy, the addition of cream to the dish is rare, thank goodness. And in that case, it should be called fettuccine. Okay, so that's the story of fettuccine Alfredo. I learned it today. I'm so happy that came up. Then, of course, there are these giant books, American Food and Drink, okay? Tons of stuff. Then there's this big fatty. This thing must be 5 kilos. It's Martha's American Food. And hers covers the entire country. We have regional food as well. Then we have down south, okay, look at what you see on the cover, seafood. So are you getting the idea that maybe American food is a little bit more complicated than we thought? But then we're in the American South, let's talk about soul food. So soul food is what? What's soul food, do you think? Think about soul music. Who makes soul food? African-American cuisine, which is an important part of American cuisine, is soul food, right? And of course, people have the idea, like even Americans don't really know what soul food is. Many Americans believe that it is just fried chicken, right? Just fried and that's it. But actually, the evolution of soul food starts with when the slaves came to America and were working on plantations in the South. And you can imagine that they were not being given the best of the best. They're giving the worst of the food that was available. So actually, very little meat was originally in soul food has a lot of vegetarian dishes just because they through the generations, learned how to cook very well with very little meat, actually. So it's funny because now there's a big movement of vegan soul food, and it's actually quite natural because, and what they say is like, well, we've gone along for lots of time with very little meat. So actually, why not, do something for the planet too and cut down on the meat? And so the vegan soul food movement came to be. We also have the Cowboy Cookbook. What did the cowboy? So that's a lot about cooking over a fire. Okay, it's because a lot of our historic recipes, even macaroni and cheese, which we kind of laugh about, right? Because it seems like we it stole it from the Italians or something, but actually, and maybe we probably did. It was definitely it was definitely a European dish that was brought over. I think it was actually a French dish. Okay, and when it was originally made in America, it was made over a fire and the noodles were cooked in milk. So you cook instead of water, like pasta in water, it would be pasta in milk and then you add cheese later. Now it's in a box with another powdered. It's quite disgusting, but also kind of delicious if you grew up on it. It's kind of like Nutella. It's terrible for you. It's like there's something, but it's so good. But then I've got Paula Dean's Southern Cooking. Okay, so I have all of these books here. None of these, by the way, are dessert cookbooks, which I could have another 20 books just to those. But I want to talk a little bit about this one, which is called One Dish Meals. Now, Americans are very famous for being a little bit lazy, right? So we like to make things casseroles. If we can stick it all in one dish, we're going to do that, okay? So there's the idea of Americans is that, and it's probably true to a certain extent. I don't want to say that any of these notions about Americans are necessarily wrong. They're based on something, but I just want to point out that there's a little bit of complexity that I think is interesting. I'm really interested right now in how Americans are developing their palate, how they're changing. There's a lot of work to be done, of course, but I can tell you in my own family, the food that we grew up eating was very different than the food that my family eats now. Now everybody's very sophisticated. They all, they know what, these fancy cheeses, and they know what all these, they have all the fancy ingredients from around the world. But I remember I had my first bite of basil, when I was 20. Can I just repeat that? I had never had basilico before. I'd never had basil before the age of 20, fresh basil, Because in Wisconsin, where I'm from, it's cold. You don't have a basil plant. Maybe now everybody has basil plants, but I remember those days. So of course now I'm very sophisticated and, have my own basil plants and everything, but I am from a tradition that really didn't have a lot of these things. The most exotic seasoning in my family's house, and I had a great grandmother who lived with us, who cooked for us, but the most exotic spice was salt and pepper. So I'm talking about a very typical American family. The one dish meals were important in my house. Also because everybody worked. My grandmother, who just died a couple years ago, she was 98 when she died. My grandmother worked. Everybody worked. My mother worked. We didn't have that sort of luxury of having the two parents at home or one at home, one at work, etc. So there are lots of reasons why we may have gotten lazy. I think one of the, maybe it wasn't laziness, maybe it was just busyness was one thing. And now there's something else at work. So I want to just kind of move ahead with this so that was my picture. I kind of surprised myself with this. But it's fair to talk about the standard American diet, the sad diet. Interesting, right? I like to think that we're more sophisticated than we used to be, but I don't think we are. So 70% of the American diet is made up of processed foods. And we talk about processed foods, we're talking about foods that we call them hyper palatable, meaning they taste good. If, we can talk about McDonald's being disgusting. I haven't had McDonald's in 30 years, but when I did go, boy, it was delicious because all of, processed foods are engineered to be delicious. They're also very cheap. They're not expensive. So at some point, I think it became cheaper. Now, again, I can be proven wrong on this, but I think the perception became that it was sometimes cheaper and easier to eat out than to eat at home. So there is definitely a change in culture around cooking. The pandemic brought cooking back. Uh-oh, I don't see you anymore. Do you see me?
Yes, we see.
Okay, I don't see you anymore, but that's okay. I can hear you and I can feel you. So anyway, but the 70% of our diet is still processed foods. And it's not necessarily McDonald's, mind you. When I go to my mom's house now, I was there in July, and there's a lot of eating out going on. There's a lot of having lunch out, and it's not necessarily fast food, but it's still processed food. So I think that, I think people are eating a lot of fast food, but it's not necessarily the only thing. They're also eating these delicious refined foods in other types of places that maybe look a little nicer, but probably still have the same, nutritional value. So 10% of Americans' disposable income goes to fast food, which is kind of insane. If you think about how much you make in a month and think about 10% of that going to fast food, I don't even think in Trieste that would be possible just because there aren't that many fast food places around. I guess you could say pizza or something. Okay, that makes sense to me. But that's how ubiquitous these places are. In fact, in one city, you may have one city that has 20 McDonald's in it, okay? And so it's, I think for a lot of people, hard to avoid. The average American consumes 130 pounds of sugar. 2.2 pounds is 1 kilo, just to give you an idea. Okay, no, don't ask me to do that math in my head, but divide it in half and you'll get somewhere close, okay? So lots of sugar, and this is the sugar you can see, but a lot of the sugar you can't see because sugar is hidden in everything. So more than 1 in 3 American adults is obese. I think this is not a surprise for you. We've seen this, upwards trajectory for the last, 50 or 60 years, as the American food chain started to change a little bit, and also, the way food is produced, what's being used, et cetera. So, that's something we've seen over a long period. And we're talking about sugary drinks. 60% of all middle schools and high schools in the early 2000s have vending machines because schools make money off of selling soft drinks. So like Coca-Cola and other types of multicolored drinks to kids. And of course, that's just more sugar. Okay. So in the standard American diet, this is no surprise, but the most common foods are fried foods, grain-based desserts, high-fat dairy, processed foods, processed meats, which are highly carcinogenic, right? Bacon, deli meats, etc. Red meat, refined grains like white pasta, white flour, sugared sweetened beverages, okay? So the breakdown for most people is 50% carbs, 15% protein, and 35% fat, okay? So, but what this means usually is that people are eating more meat and less fruits and vegetables, because I think, and the problem too is that if you're eating a lot of refined things, obviously you're not getting full, and so it's just sort of this, you're getting too many calories, but you don't feel full, so you just eat more and more and more. So there's a lot of like food addictions that are coming out of this sort of unhealthy, also relationship with food. Okay, now at some point, there's a really sad statistic about how the American family and how few families are able to actually have dinner together. That's been happening since probably the 80s. There was a change in how people eat food together. They say that your children will have a much higher success rate at school if you have family dinners together, but it's not always happening for a million reasons: the frenetic lifestyle, sports, everything else. So in Italy, I think this is still a sacred thing that we're still eating with our families, but it's not always easy even here, is it, to make sure everybody's together. But there are a couple people who have been fighting to change the way we eat. One of them is Michelle Obama. If you remember her, the first lady, okay? She brought a vegetable garden to the White House, which I believe was immediately dug up by Melania. But at any rate, there was this effort to try to get people to look at slow food again, to get people interested in growing their own food. And her thing is just, it's not enough to limit advertisements for foods that aren't healthy. It's going to be critical to increase marketing for foods that are healthy. And then there's Michael Pollan. Have you heard about this guy? He wrote a great book called The Omnivore's Dilemma. The longer I've looked at these questions of the American diet and the public health crisis that we face because of that diet, the more I've come to the conclusion that the collapse of cooking is a big part of the problem. So when you don't cook at home, you don't know what's in your food. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. Again, I feel hopeful because I think the pandemic got many people cooking at home again. But on the other hand, I look at even my own house. My mother, lives alone. She's, doesn't want to cook anymore. So what does she eats out a lot, or she gets stuff she can put in the microwave. She has a beautiful kitchen, but it's not very functional. So I'm wondering if she's probably like a lot of other people. So I can't say this stuff is very far from my own experience. It's interesting that it seems to be white Americans' food choices that are actually contributing the most to climate change, which is interesting. So we've got this, a new study finds that more greenhouse gases are emitted producing the typical diet of a white American than that of Hispanic or African American, for the reasons we talked about. When people think about, like when Americans have a stereotype about, Hispanic people, about African American people as eating a lot of fried food, et cetera. But actually, it's the white people who are eating all the factory farmed meat that are contributing to the crisis that we're facing now. But another thing that's interesting that it's hard to imagine, especially if you don't live in America, but there are areas in America where you have to jump in a car and go 20 or 30 minutes to find a place that has fresh food. It's insane to think about. But there are places where they're really like in poorer neighborhoods, excuse me. There are many places that just don't have stores where you can buy fresh food. Lots of fast food, but not a store where you can buy fresh supermarket. I'm not talking about, it doesn't even have to be the highest quality food, but let it be fresh, right? And they call those, I think they call them, there's a name for it, something like a fresh food desert, I think they call it. So these are places where it's very difficult to find fresh food, okay? So what it says here, so 20% of lower income households say that they don't have access to a grocery store with fresh produce close to where they live. I mean, can you imagine not being able to get fresh produce? So sometimes the only places where you can get food are like a convenience store that might just have like the, kind of stuff you'd get when you need something fast to eat, but nothing like a real supermarket where you can get fresh food. Okay, so it's a pretty complicated matter. I just wanted to just point that out because we sometimes have this idea, oh, those Americans, but actually I think sometimes it's if you don't have much time because you're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, you don't have something close to you, maybe you don't have a car, this can be a real problem for your health. So the health issue in America has a lot to do with our socioeconomic problems as well. Okay, the rich people aren't the ones with big health problems, right? We're not, Mrs. Gates doesn't have a weight problem, right? But we're talking about many of the, I would say, normal people who are working for a living and trying to make ends meet are going to have a harder time finding fresh food than the people who live in the neighborhoods who have the Whole Foods and all those other fancy places. Okay. So other facts are that Americans do pay attention to healthy eating. They know what they're supposed to do, but they don't do it. Okay. Why is that? Maybe it's food addictions. Food tastes good. I get talk for myself. I don't know why I don't do what I'm supposed to do. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't always do it. I'm supposed to go running. I'm supposed to do all these things, but I put other things first. And so I guess I'm not so different from a lot of other Americans. So Americans agree that healthy eating is important and that they can change their destiny. But again, they know that exercise is important. They're not necessarily going to do it. Okay. Now, this is the thing I thought was interesting. More Americans claim to focus on taste and nutrition than on convenience. So when we thought that people were going to fast foods because it was easier, it's not necessarily because it's easier. It's because it tastes good. It's that so refined, that hyper palatable, so delicious stuff. But it's not necessarily just because it's easier. Sometimes it's just taste, although nutrition is becoming important, but how important, I don't know. Okay. So this is just about how Americans feel about their diets. But I thought this was interesting because we tend to talk about the last 50 years, but actually the problem with American foods goes way back to the 19th century. H.L. Mencken, who lived in this time period here, said, what we need in this country is a general improvement in eating. We have the best raw materials in the world, both quantitatively and qualitatively, but most of them are ruined in the process of preparing them for the table. So he was not a fan of American food even back then. Mark Twain talked about food in his book, A Tramp Abroad, saying a man accustomed to American food and American domestic cookery would not starve to death suddenly in Europe, but I think he would gradually waste away and eventually die. So he's someone who really was a fan of American foods. And when he traveled, he suffered because things weren't what he recognized. Okay. This was a later one, but I want to go back to, this is another about, okay. I love this. Foreigners cannot enjoy our food. Are you there?
I don't know. I never taste American food.
Well, it says they cannot enjoy our food, I suppose, any more than we can enjoy theirs. It's not strange, for tastes are made, not born. I might glorify my bill of fare until I was tired, but after all, the Scotchman would shake his head and say, where's your haggis? And the Fijian would sigh and say, where's your missionary? So even I think Mark Twain later on came around to foreign food saying, well, maybe it's not just my food that's good. Maybe it's good to check out other people's. Okay, but this is my favorite one, and maybe you recognize this. Americans can eat garbage, provided you sprinkle it liberally with ketchup, mustard, chili sauce, Tabasco sauce, cayenne pepper, or any other condiment which destroys the original flavor or the dish. So Henry Miller said that about American cooking. Okay. And then he said, you can travel 50,000 miles in America without once tasting a piece of good bread. Okay. So, oh, and then this one, a dancer. I would rather live in Russia on black bread and vodka than in the United States at the best hotels. America knows nothing of food, love, or art. So just to tell you that this sort of disdain of American food goes way back. It's not just us. Now, okay, they've been talking about forever. James Fenimore Cooper said, the Americans are the grossest feeders of any civilized nation known. As a nation, their food is heavy, coarse, indigestible, while it's taken in the least artificial forms that cookery will allow. The predominance of grease in the American kitchen, coupled with the habits of hearty eating and the constant expectoration, I don't know what that means, are the causes of the diseases of the stomach, which are so common in America. So even back then, we were talking about the problems with disease and with food. So, what is American food again? It's all these things and more, okay? This is the sort of list of all the books I read to you before. But I also want to talk about, even knowing this, what are we eating? What do we like to eat? We've got our favorites. We've got macaroni cheese. We've got the Civil War recipe for it right here for over an open fire, which was just macaroni, which is the elbow macaroni. It was those little ones. In milk, put some, and then melt cheese on it. What could get better than that? It's a little bit like Alfredo. Maybe it's just part of our DNA. We love these simple, pasta, we love simple pasta, right? So this is about that. Then, of course, if you ask any American what their favorite meal is, they're probably going to say Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving it's coming up. It's the fourth Thursday in November. Here at the Italian American Association in Trieste, we celebrate it on Saturday. So we're going to do it on the 27th. And we always have turkey, but if you don't eat turkeys like me, I don't eat meat. So we always have, there are lots of side dishes that go well with Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving for us is sometimes more important than Christmas because it's a holiday where we don't worry about gifts. It's just about eating and being together. It's all those delicious things from fall, like the fall squashes, these, all the stuff we love, meat, potatoes, gravy, the sauce. So, cranberries, all the things that we love. So for us, it's like it's a comfort meal. And when your mom tries to change the recipe or do something modern, everybody gets very angry. It's the one time where we really want to keep our traditions alive. Okay. But if you ask us, we're also going to say breakfast at the diner or our favorite greasy spoon. So breakfast is a huge deal for us. There are those pancakes. I had to show you pancakes. And we joke about the potatoes, the eggs, the bacon, the quantities, right, which are insane. But it's also true that we don't eat like this every day. Breakfast is maybe once a week. It's a special occasion. It's going to be brunch. It's going to be your breakfast and your lunch, and it's going to be a social occasion. So you normally don't have a breakfast like this alone. I might at my house because nobody wants to eat a good breakfast with me. So once a week, I make myself an amazing breakfast. It's going to be a vegan one, but it's going to be full of stuff. Someone had a question. I heard you. Did you have a question?
About the breakfast.
Tell me.
Not really.
Oh, you don't have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry, because I can't see you. I can only hear you. So when I think it sounds like there's a question, I start to. So yeah, so this is, eating out in a restaurant maybe once a week with your friends. You go out for breakfast and lunch together. You drink coffee with your meal, not after your meal. That's another very American thing too. You might have coffee with your lunch too. When I'm at home, I drink coffee all the time. You've probably seen it in, on TV shows and things too. I'm from Wisconsin. We have supper club food. Supper clubs are like a little nicer restaurant. They're independently owned and They're kind of kitsch, 1960s, 1970s. This is one of my favorites called the Hobnob in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It still looks like this. It's very kitsch, but there's this beautiful view of Lake Michigan outside. This is Lake Michigan. You can't see the other side. You'd think it would be, it looks like open ocean to me. And then we have our drinks, of course. This is a famous Wisconsin drink called the Brandy Old Fashion, which is just, instead of using whiskey, in other states they might use whiskey, we use brandy, so that's what makes it different. Looks like this. If I go out with my mother, even though she never drinks, when we go out, she's always going to get a Brandy Old Fashion. And it was very kitsch for a while. Now people even in New York at the Wisconsin, it's become very cool to kind of go back in time, vintage. But we also love side dishes, coleslaw and potato salad. Yum. So coleslaw is like cabbage. We always use these like sauces with mayonnaise in them, kind of watered down, kind of strange, comfort food all the way. And this is a German potato salad. So we're always eating potatoes, again, mayonnaise, mustard, sometimes hard-boiled eggs mixed in there, celery, dill, some things like that. So it's very common to find on the side of your plate even when you get a hamburger, if you're going to a place that's not McDonald's, okay? But the winner is, if you ask the Americans, besides Thanksgiving, they're going to say sandwiches. We have the best sandwiches. So we're not necessarily eating hamburgers every day, but we love these sandwiches. The number one most famous sandwich in America is the BLT, bacon, lettuce, and tomato. Okay. And in fact, I'm a vegan. I'm always trying to recreate this. I've never quite gotten there, but I've gotten close. The Reuben, this is corned beef with cheese and sauerkraut. You would like that, right? If you have like that, this sort of, we have a lot of German tradition with us. So sauerkraut and Thousand Island dressing, which again it's mayonnaise. It's like a salsa rosa, I would call it in Trieste. It's like a mayonnaise plus ketchup plus, I don't know, probably has pickles in there and things. Roast beef sandwich. This is a classic. A Philly cheesesteak. This is famous in Philadelphia, where it's got beef and then cheese on it. The famous club sandwich. I think you know what that is. That always has a lot of layers on it. The lobster roll. This is important. In Maine, we talked about Maine seafood. So the lobster roll is sort of the, if you go out for lobster, that's going to be a really expensive, fancy meal, but you can always afford to have a hot dog bun with some lobster on it. It's called the lobster roll. And that comes in 6th place. 7th place is the Cuban sandwich, which I've never had before. It looks a little bit like a Reuben, doesn't it? It's got corned beef, but I don't know what that other stuff is. Avocado toast. This has become famous in the last 10 years or so. It's just toast with avocado on it. Delicious. And of course, a famous one is peanut butter and jelly. You think, or many people think that peanut butter has some grease in it. Actually, peanut butter is just peanuts in your blender. So if you put them in your little bowl for 5 minutes, you don't add anything. It's just the oil, the natural oil comes out. It becomes like a paste. And we like salty and sweet together. So peanut butter and marmellata jelly together for us is the perfect meal, especially if you have good bread. That's going to make a difference. A hoagie is just a deli sandwich with all that, with the kinds of meats and cheeses that you like. And then a plain old tuna salad sandwich. Who doesn't love that? It's just tuna, a little bit of mayonnaise, so delicious. And the French dip is roast beef, and then you dip it in this dipping sauce. So we love to have dipping sauce. You dip everything in there. Okay. So what looks good to you? I don't know, but think about why that would be. So these are the things that I can tell you are our favorites. When I talk to my friends, this is the stuff that we like. But I also want to just point out that there's when we talk about going green or what's going to happen in the future, how we can fix the climate crisis, I think we're going to have to go back to the Native American diet. Okay, so there's a whole story about how their diet changed. Okay, pre-colonial, post-colonial. Okay, and this is a famous Native American chef in America who's doing things to change people's perceptions about native foods, indigenous foods, but also how we can save the planet. And then this is an example of, this would be indigenous food. So all this stuff, plant-based, it's the way to go, right? So I think this is probably where we're going to go into the future, at least I hope, going back to the farmers markets and doing that kind of thing. So here's some recipes too, some native recipes. And next time I see you, we're going to actually talk about Native American culture. But I just want to share these with you. And actually, I've got an updated version of this lesson that actually has a recipe. It has some soul food in it too. So there's an article that I share in that from this author about the movement in soul food, what's happening now. So that's what I had to share with you today. Do you have any questions?
Not really. I was only like, I didn't knew that peanut butter was only peanuts. I didn't knew that.
Isn't that crazy? You know how I learned that? I learned it only because when I moved here 20 years ago, you couldn't really find natural peanut butter. I like the kind that's just peanuts. And I didn't know you could make it yourself. And I looked up a recipe just in case, and I found it. And I've been making it myself ever since. And when you make it yourself, it's so delicious because it's hot when because it's 5 minutes of, chopping up the peanuts. It's the same way you make Nutella. Actually, you can make Nutella the same way. It's just the hazelnuts. You heat them up in the oven first, then you put them in the food processor for 5 minutes, add a little bit of cacao or a little cocoa, and you've got something that tastes a lot better than Nutella, and you know exactly what's in it. So yeah, I learned that here too. Any other questions? No, great. Well, if you want a copy of the lesson, this time I promise I'll send you both lessons. Just give your information to Simone, okay? Give your email to him, and I will send you a PDF with today's lesson that if you want to read a little bit further or get some of the resources that we talked about today, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you liked it. I'm sorry I can't see you right now, but I can hear you. So I hope you have a great evening, and I'll see you next time, I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay.
Bye. Thanks a lot.